Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today, it's time for another top 10 list. Okay, we are officially in the home stretch of this discography review, and with how surprisingly successful this series on Mike Paradinas has been so far, with enough demand for a video like this, it's now time for me to do a video breaking down my top 10 favorite tracks from him. A format which doesn't get as much traction nowadays as it used to back in the earlier days of this channel, but they're still fun to do and are relatively simple to put together, so I keep doing them. And I think it's only fitting for Paradinas to be explored from an individual track perspective, since I feel like that's kind of more the way I tend to think about him as well. Sure, he may have cohesive albums that frequently all have their own separate identities, but I don't think there's a single track I can think of by this man which requires hearing in the full context of the album it comes from to fully get into. Maybe with the exception of the material from Duntus Born Abbots. I like that project more for the full album experience than for any individual tracks, and ended up not getting any representation in this video as a result. But even like that album's opener was almost an honorable mention. The overwhelmingly vast majority of tracks this guy makes standalone as their own self-contained beasts. They take you on their own little journey on their own, or just give you the right burst of frantic energy or melodic mood setting or whatever. And most of his albums, even the ones that might stick to some kind of loose theme, aren't really designed to assemble some kind of unspoken narrative or have any kind of overarching concept or structure. They're instead designed to just hit you with great track after great track. Mike Paradinas is an artist who is honestly much better fit for this format than he is for an album ranking. Even though I'm also going to do one of those anyway, those typically just get a lot more views than the top 10s. The only problem with one of these videos might just be cutting it down to only a top 10 because this man has released so many boatloads of material. I once again have 20 honorable mentions with several from more obscure side projects, and it was really difficult to narrow down to that few. It will be quite easy for people to make their own list entirely out of picks that I don't acknowledge in this video at all. I just cut it off at top 10 because the top 20 would be too much work. So, let's get into it. As per usual, disclaimer that this list only reflects my own personal opinion, which you can feel free to disagree with. Just ranked on which tracks I hold the closest to me personally, which itself is not set in stone, liable to change in the future. This list does not take into consideration which tracks happen to be the most popular among fans. In fact, I may as well just warn you in advance that none of the top 10 tracks I've chosen are from his album Lunatic Harness. I have 2 honorable mentions from that album, and that's all the representation you're getting here. Although aside from that, I don't think I have any big hot takes with the tracks I actually did pick. A lot of them are fairly obvious picks themselves, but hey, if you really disagree with my list, feel free to put together your own list and post it in the comments. Always interested in hearing other perspectives. But let's not waste any more time. This is the top 10 best µ-Ziq songs. Number 10. µ-Ziq from Bilious Paths. Alright, let's kick off the list with the very first track I ever heard from Mike Paradinas. I randomly found this bizarre, unstable sounding down-tempo cut from an iTunes Essentials playlist. Found it cool that the artist had a Greek letter in his stage name, bought it, and it just stuck with me. It didn't immediately translate to me becoming a more in-depth fan, what with the rest of Bilious Paths not seeming to appeal to me as much, as well as that being the only album he had available on iTunes at the time. It wasn't until years later when I sat with his full catalog in college that I was like, oh wow, this guy's actually amazing. We'll get to the track that first elicited that reaction a bit later. But point is, this track goes back with me further than any other track of his, and that alone gives it an advantage here. The warped guitar melodies easily sticking in my mind, going in next to the unstable, triangle-heavy beat work and other various odd melodic layers coming and going with occasional glitch work and interesting detours and progressions. I don't know what it is about this track, but it just has something tantalizing to it. Some unique flavor that no other track in his catalog really has. That combined with the extra nostalgia just really makes it a standout I'll never forget. Number 9. Magic Pony Ride Part 1 from Magic Pony Ride. I suspect several commenters who might wish to put together their own version of this list aren't going to include anything he made after 1999, but I don't think he ever lost his touch after that. He's got plenty of later period gems as well, and here's a track I particularly happen to be really feeling that he just put out last year. Later period Paradinas definitely tends to be a lot more on the straightforwardly earnest and subdued side compared to the crazier excursions he'd put out earlier on. But sometimes he just delivers a mix like this that is just so unabashedly pretty that I'm not sure how anyone can really resist it. Just a simple mix of bright melodic synths, MIDI harps, crashing breakbeats, all meant to evoke his feelings during one vacation he went out on with his family riding on Icelandic ponies and over a snowy landscape at dawn. All the other tracks on this album do a roughly equally solid job capturing this exact vibe with the same ingredients. You could easily replace this track's spot on the list with others like Uncle Daddy or Goodbye, but I think this one just happens to be the most immediately striking out of all of them. Number 8. Ethereal Murmurings from Bluff Limbo. Man, you know, it's really nice when you come across an album from this era, see it ends in a 10-minute track, and it turns out to actually end in a 10-minute track instead of a pair of 2-minute tracks separated by a long silence. And it's even nicer when that 10-minute track is this good. Ethereal Murmurings may more or less be the same loop repeating over its entire length, stepping up and down between the same two blissful chords with a triangle echoing out every few beats. Although, first of all, there's a bit more to it than that. There's a couple of different melodies placed on top over time. There's even a whole section where the chord progression shifts as well to stepping up and down a loop of 4 chords. But even if it didn't introduce any new ideas beyond the 2-minute mark, I never get sick of its core loops and probably still wouldn't even if it got stretched out to a full hour. It's just so nice and pleasant and refreshing, and makes for the perfect ending to Bluff Limbo, the last exhale of relief after all the wildly varied craziness that the rest of the album took you on. Fantastic track to be sure, and we've only got more obvious picks going upwards from there. Number 7. Phi 1700 UV from Tango Invective. Okay, if you were starting to feel like this list was sticking a bit much to the chill side of Paradinas' sound, let's get one of his classic bangers in here. You know how when I was talking about my Mendigus and I teased the existence of the first track that officially turned me into an in-depth fan of this guy and made me realize that in sitting through his catalog that I was really getting into something special? Yeah, that's this one. Tango Invective already had no shortage of eye-popping tracks before it in the track listing, we'll get to some others later. But this track in particular really caught me because I hadn't heard any other IDM track quite like it at the time. The loops of skittering mechanical beats that kept building up and banging harder and harder were already addicting in the same way most of the album leading up to it was. But then the saccharine pads and synth vibraphone melodies started coming in and I was like, oh wow, I love all of this. The semi-improvisational tone of the melodies that felt a bit jazz-influenced really struck me, and again, didn't sound like any other IDM artists I knew. Even other jazz-influenced IDM artists like Square Pusher didn't have anything like this in their repertoire. Other tracks have since come along to impress me even more, obviously, but you can blame this track for first getting me to realize how much of a treat I was in for in falling down the Paradinas rabbit hole, eventually resulting in the existence of this series you're watching now, and for that, it absolutely had to be mentioned here. Number 6. Twangle Front from Bluff Limbo. I think my favorite kind of µ-Ziq track is the kind that sounds like a progressively building 50-car pileup. The kind that starts with maybe one simple repeating pattern and then like every few measures introduces a new loop of instrumentation to play on top of it until there's like 7 or 8 separate loops playing at once and it sounds like total chaos. Maybe this top 10 list doesn't have as many of that kind of track as you would expect, mainly just because I didn't want the whole list to only be stuff from Bluff Limbo. But Twangle Front is one of the absolute best examples of this formula that cannot be ignored. Maybe even the shining example of it. At first this sounds like it's gonna sound like this delicate mix of shifting ambient pads, then there's twinkling melodic blips introduced that get more complex, and wiry percussion and shuffling hi-hats and synth whistling, then more off-the-wall melodic blips, and bassy acid synths and steady dance floor kicks, and more melodic patterns and blaring laser-like snares, and even some break beats added in right at the end for good measure too. It just keeps rising higher and higher and getting more and more chaotic to such a mind-blowing extent. It gets absolutely freaking epic in such a way that you only hear from Mike Paradinas, and is one of the first tracks I think of when I think of the particular talents he has that set him apart from his IDM colleagues. Number 5. Μ-Ziq from In Pine Effect. Alright, now let's go back to the more straightforwardly simple stuff. This track isn't much more than a looping sample of acoustic guitar and cello, moving down a repeating progression of 3 chords, going up next to a few hip-hop breakbeats and some cheerful synth xylophones, sort of resembling the melodies he used on his track Μ-Ziq on Tango Invective. It's pretty much the same thing throughout its entire 6-minute running time, but it just hits such a straightforwardly earnest emotional note that so easily puts me in a good mood like few other tracks of his can, and the loops just never get old. It's also quite clever with the way it interpolated that acoustic guitar and cello sample originally taken from the Kristen Hirsch song Your Ghost, which originally was a far more downbeat and sad sounding track, turned into this really warm and friendly cut. I used to wonder whether or not the presence of that sample was the reason this album took so long to hit streaming services or see any kind of greater availability beyond its original CD run. But there were no sample clearance issues. The real reason this album wasn't available was entirely because of major label rights holding bullshit. Which, yeah, that tracks. Thankfully, the album is now available on all the usual streaming services, only finally hit the digital shelves right after I actually posted my review. So you have no more excuses not to go and hear the album and this track, which is that album's greatest height. Number 4. Goodbye, Goodbye from Royal Astronomy. Speaking of tracks that hit particular earnest emotional notes, Royal Astronomy may be, I suppose, one of the more divisive entrants in his catalog, with many fans thinking it's a big letdown after Lunatic Harness, and many others, such as myself, considering it as an interesting, underrated swerve for him that stands out in his catalog in its own way. But whether you love the full album or not, most people seem to agree that its closer is easily the biggest highlight. Just this really warm and cozy trip-hop sort of cut with all these moody liquid synth lines, a few delicate MIDI strings, and most importantly, the wordless guest vocals from Kazumi, who has this really sultry and downbeat tone to her voice that gives this track this really deep and emotionally vulnerable quality to it. Such a simple tune, but such a viscerally pretty one that can occasionally even get me to tear up a bit sometimes. Absolutely one of his most iconic moments. Alright, so next will be my top 3, and I do want to make it absolutely clear, the last picks I have on this list are functionally just a 3-way tie. While my top 3 are always going to be the same 3 tracks, they could go in any order depending on my mood on a given day. The order I happen to go with is kinda arbitrary. In fact, to illustrate how close the top 3 are, before I get into my top 3, I'm gonna go through the honorable mentions here instead. Brace Yourself, Jason from Lunatic Harness. Tango Invective from Tango Invective. Make It Funky from Bluff Limbo. Uncle Daddy from Magic Pony Ride. The Wonky Song from Royal Astronomy. 4 AM from 1977. µ-Ziq Theme from Tango Invective. Approaching Menace from Lunatic Harness. Mountain Island Boner from Cued Corners. Within a Sound from In Pine Effect. XT from XTLP. Rio Stand from Bluff Limbo. The Motorbike Track from Royal Astronomy. Mange 2 from XTLP. Lime Arrow from 1977. Satisfaction Dub from Tusken Raiders Housework Volume 3. Slow Dance from Jake Slazenger Das ist ein Groovy Beat, ja. Housewife from Kid Spatula's Meast. Reg from Mike and Rich's Expert Knob Twiddlers. Bliss from Heterotic Love and Devotion. Gonna stop there, and again, there's plenty more where that came from. It'd be quite easy to expand this out further, but I had to stop somewhere. If you want, you can add on the buffer music, which is this track, or the track that played in the video's intro. But now that we're through all that, what are these top 3 that are apparently close enough together that I decided to go through those honorable mentions early? Number 3. Gobbots from Bluff Limbo. Alright, I think this track is the winner for most visceral banger Paradinas ever came up with, and one of his most creative ones to boot. You might think you have an idea where this track might be going from its initial moments, which feature nothing but these really austere-sounding synths that resemble a chiming grandfather clock. Sounds rather serious and dramatic. But those clock chimes get chopped up or repurposed into other clanging dissonant chords and fall into a quickly building mix of intense industrial percussion that just smashes you in the face, with a few other quirky melodic textures on the side, quickly revealing the track's true identity as the bizarrely addicting goof that it is. And even if it is a bit of a goof, it's never outright played for a joke. The bait and switch gives you way more of a fun track than you'd bargained for when it started, and all the dense layers of clattering percussion are so dang heavy and claustrophobic, but extremely headbang-worthy. It's not just a track that plays so heavily to all of Paradinas' greatest strengths, from the off-the-wall melodic construction to how hard-hitting the beats are, but there's really no other track in existence that has the same effect as it. I don't know what else to say about it besides, this is just genius. Number 2. Swan Vesta from Tango Invective. This track isn't quite as out-of-the-box or creative as Gobbots. The mix of propulsive industrial percussion and melodic washes does resemble lots of other different tracks he's made over the years, but it's almost kind of the gold standard in my mind as far as any of his early 90s material goes, and the best iteration of its specific formula. It just feels like such a big, important moment in his catalog that best sums up his overall sound and demonstrates to you right away why he's considered such an IDM legend. The beats on Gobbots are visceral, but even they don't slap you as quickly as Swan Vestas do, and just instantly make me want to dance like this does. And the melodies may be a bit straightforward and even understated. Other tracks of his feel like they go a lot more gloriously over the top, but the way all of these elements mix together so effectively, it's just chef's kiss. I don't know what to say. It's one of the true iconic all-time greats as far as IDM tracks are concerned. Again, this could just as easily go in my number 1 spot depending on how I'm feeling. So, what did I arbitrarily happen to be feeling more today? Number 1. Weakling Paradinas from Chewed Corners. You know, this probably isn't the most agreeable top pick I could have gone with, going with this much more modern track from 2013 over a big iconic 90s classic like Swan Vesta. I've even seen people mention that they think this track is a bit overrated, and hey, if you feel that way, that's fine. I even kind of get it, since I actually think this track might be actively worse if you take it in its full album context. It comes after 13 other tracks that also feature a similarly bright melodic sound that might run together a bit, and even lessen this track's impact as a result. Even if I personally love the rest of the album and believe this to be the perfect climactic closer, I cannot deny this is a track which probably is best enjoyed all by itself without any lead-up. But, I mean, are you freaking listening to what's going on behind me right now? How can you not be absolutely floored by this? It's another one of those classic 50-car pileup type of tracks that Paradinas does so well, just building up more and more layers of bright, shiny, glittering melodies and propulsive techno beats and blasting bass stabs and screeching chords. Just reaching further and further heights like you wouldn't be able to imagine when the track got started. Just like other classic tracks of his, like Godbots and Twanglefront. But it also has a deeper emotional vulnerability that even tracks like those don't have. It feels like such an overwhelming burst of joy and euphoria that is so intense it might end up feeling dangerous or like it could damage you with how much happiness it has. It feels massively high stakes and epic, but it still feels so earnest that you can't help but get swept up in it anyway. This is a track that both makes me want to headbang and cry at the same time. And for all of that, I decided upon it as my current favorite track of his overall. And yeah, that's gonna be the list. But of course, this is all just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.